Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to discuss OpTic a little bit because I think this is a team that when you look at the lineup on paper and when this team was coming together, myself and I think a lot of people thought that surely this team should be able to achieve something. Like, yeah, sure, they were always going to play little brother to Astralis, but this is a team that I legitimately thought should be able to challenge North to be the second best Danish team. And if you're the second best Danish team with the amount of talent that's in Denmark, you reasonably should probably be, a strong top 10 team in the world, maybe at times making deep runs in tournaments towards semifinals or something like that if everything goes according to plan. Yeah, sure, you're never really going to surpass Astralis, and teams like Navi, Team Liquid through the bulk of this year have been playing really, really well, and so maybe trying to surpass one of those teams was going to be a problem. Maybe if FaZe and Mousesports get their acts together, those teams should always kind of be in the top 5 as well. But yeah, you would think that at the very least this team should be, in the top 10, or certainly have the potential to be with the lineup they had on paper. Obviously some of the international lineups OpTic had, after the North American team they had, which was successful, towards 2016, those teams you could kind of see how they would be limited. Either they didn't have the proper in-game leadership, or there was going to be, just not enough firepower. Obviously that whole blended North American Danish team was having all of its issues. But this team, fully Danish, you would think this could be something. This might be able to get something done. And early on, they did show some signs that perhaps maybe they were going to ramp up towards something. But really, when you think about the Zotac event, when you think about the Major, when you think about some of the other events that they've been at recently, they just have not at all lived up to the pedigree of the players that make up the team, or at least what you thought they were as players, or what they have been able to show you in the past. They aren't living up to it anymore. And so I kind of wanted to just talk about how this team has just certainly struggled over, I would say for sure the last 4 or so LAN events. And really, they've never truly found their footing, it feels like. And yes, there was a roster change in the middle of all this. Obviously Nico recently coming in for Gade after the Major. They did play with him at the Starlight Season 6 event. They also had him as a stand-in at certain points online, even prior to him joining the team full-time. But yeah, this team has certainly had its issues, and I kind of want to talk through some of the problems that they're facing right now. And while I won't really be able to diagnose why these problems exist and what they can necessarily do to fix them, I can hopefully at least maybe pinpoint some of them and try to analyze them just a little bit. Again, I've watched some of their games, yes. I've looked over some of the numbers and all that stuff, sure. But by no means am I some type of head coach that has the miracle cure for what's going wrong with OpTic. I don't claim to be able to do that, but I did just kind of want to talk through it a little bit. So first of all, let's talk about how this team got started, because when they first kind of came together was the EPL Season 7 Finals, where it was their debut event offline. And at this event, they actually did have a couple of cool best-of-3 victories over NIP and Space Soldiers. The opening game against Astralis, can kind of understand how they're going to lose that, but ended up losing to the SK team in a 1-2 series. I was actually pretty close, though. Like, one of their losses was like a 13-16 loss on Inferno, so they were close to actually even making the semifinals of this event, but still a top 8 finish was kind of respectable for their debut, considering the opposition they were up against and the fact that, they didn't really have a whole lot of time together before going into that event. Reasonable stuff. Now, after that, though, they went over to DreamHack Austin, where they get knocked out in the group stage, and this was especially disappointing because their first game, they lose to Rogue in a best-of-1, which you would certainly think OpTic, with their talent, were favored to beat this Rogue team, but they didn't. Fair enough, though, best-of-1, they beat Complexity, a little bit of a rivalry match with some of their old teammates, Stanislaw and Shazam. Then they wound up losing to Space Soldiers 1-2, and yeah, Space Soldiers had been kind of a middling team, kind of a Tier 2 team, and they actually did really well at the DreamHack Austin event overall. But still, it left you kind of wanting a little bit more that's happened. And then they go over the DreamHack Summer, and they actually wind up taking second at this event. They cleared the group stages, no problem against Gambit Complexity, looked a lot stronger and a little bit more on point than they had at DreamHack Austin. They beat North, the team they're competing with, to be number 2 in Denmark, so this is a good result. And from what I understand, even from talking to some of them, or talking to their coach in particular, who I had a ride on the way back to the airport with after the event was over, he talked about how this North game was what was truly important to them, that win was really the most important win for them to kind of prove that, they were better than North or what have you in their minds. And that was supposed to be like a confidence builder and a big statement to make that, they were number 2 in Denmark right behind Astralis, and obviously at some point hoped to challenge Astralis. But then they lose a steam, essentially, and they wind up, getting beat by Imperial in the finals. And from what I can understand, they just didn't care as much about this game as they did about the North game for whatever reason. I guess they had kind of hoped that they would face North in the finals and that they had just let off the gas pedal in the finals against Imperial. But still, this Imperial team, while it had some talent, never really had any true in-game leadership like this team should have. With Snappy, who is certainly an experienced in-game leader at this point, had been in-game leading Heroic all through 2016, had some success with that team, when he had Glaive and Valda on the lineup, and even after Glaive departed to go to Astralis, you still had Valda, you brought in a guy like Nico, you eventually had a guy like Yugi, so there was definitely still some pretty strong pieces, and at times they would have some pretty cool international events. It was never nothing consistent enough to really consider them an elite level team, but it was always a team you kind of had to consider might be able to do something late into 2016 into early 2017, and until the roster chaos kind of started happening when Yugi kind of benches himself and eventually obviously moves over with Snappy to OpTic, coming into this year. And so, yeah, with all of that said, you would think they should be able to beat Imperial in these finals, and they don't. And that is, to me, disappointing, even though they did make the finals and they did beat North. Yes, that was good stuff, but yeah. Then they go to the minor. They take care of business, right? They win the most important games. Yeah, they lose to Nip in the finals, but the finals is kind of an afterthought. Like, yeah, it's more prize money. Yeah, it's a title to add to your trophy case. But what was most important was making sure you qualified for the major, and they did. And so, at that point, I can't really have any complaints about the European minor. But then they go to the Zotac Grand Finals, right? And this is where the trouble really starts to show itself. This is where you really start to get concerned. This is where they lose the opening game to Ghost Gaming. Now, yeah, Ghost is a team that's certainly risen up to be kind of the middle of the pack in the North American region. They're challenging with teams like Rogue and Complexity, E United. Some of these middle of the pack North American teams, they're doing well against them. And at times, this team, like Steel and some of the core members of Ghost, have been able to qualify for some LAN events like this Zotac event through the Americas finals, like when some of the team qualified for ESL Belo Horizonte. There's definitely been some good things from this Ghost team. But again, like your OpTic, you have guys like Config and Yugi on your team who are, proven talents from their previous lineups that bring a ton of firepower to the team. You have Cajun B, this guy, yeah, had his issues when he was a main opera on North, but he's always proven himself to be like a good secondary caller, supportive type rifler, always had a lot of value in that role. And he was actually playing pretty consistently well throughout some of these trouble periods I'm talking about, up until some of these last few LAN events, all through like the EPL stuff, some of these DreamHack Open events. Cajun B was actually pretty on point. So when you have all these pieces, how are you losing the Ghost in a best of three? And certainly, after the fact, they kind of came out talking about how the focus wasn't really there, that, it was during a player bake period, that they just didn't have enough practice and preparation. They didn't have the hours in. A lot of people were just coming back from vacations and things like that. And so that was really kind of the point that was really being made. But then surely, going into the major, the focus should be there, right? The preparation should be there. The boot camping should be there. And yeah, we can talk all you want about how the scheduling of the player break around the major can be seen as a problem because people want to take time off. Sure, it's a player break. You should want a vacation, and maybe it should be after the major. Maybe it should be the break everyone takes after the major is over. But there's always been a call for there to be some break period before the major to give extra time for teams to be able to prepare instead of focusing on playing online leagues or playing other events on the tournament circuit, because you don't want to skip events all the time because you want a chance to accrue titles. Maybe you get some of your best experience playing official matches in an offline environment where you truly get to test how good you are and how well things are working. You can only maybe learn so much from scrimmages and practice. And a lot of teams still, though, wanted that period to kind of boot camp before the major. And so when it conflicts with the player break, it does become an issue. And that's a separate topic to talk about for sure. But still, certainly, you got to try to put your best foot forward at the major. And, at the major, the loss to Team Liquid can be forgiven, though I think it is a bit scary they weren't even competitive in that Mirage match. They beat Virtus Pro, but doesn't really mean much. They were a labored win against Tyloo, but, Tyloo a pretty decent team for the most part, so fair enough. Then they lose to Hellraisers in 3 overtimes, so they're playing some really close games. I think they're getting blown out of the water. But still, you just want a little bit more for this team. And they wind up getting blasted by Big on Dust 2 in the opening map of that series, and they lose a close game on Train. So they're out of the major in the groups, don't even make the playoffs. And then at the Star Ladder Season 6 finals, again, they go out in the group stages. So, basically, when you add that, and then you add Stockholm, which, of course, was really disappointing. They wound up losing to Heroics, and they were losing to, like, the third best Danish team, or what was supposed to be kind of the third best Danish team, or I guess you're supposed to be if North's really better than you, or however you want to figure it out. Like, surely Heroic should be the one under you. So I kind of skipped over Stockholm, so I kind of go back to it. Losing to Heroic there was definitely very disappointing. Going out in groups there, then you go out in groups in the major, and then you go out in groups again at the Starlighter Season 6 finals. And you didn't even play a group stage at Zotac, but still you finished basically dead last. So, I mean, this is like 4 events in a row where you're really not accomplishing anything. And while we can sit here all we want and kind of make excuses for why they lost, like, oh, I mean, you lost to a team that's like pretty good, that's rising up. For example, if we go to the Starlighter Season 6 finals, you lose to North in the opening game, which is a team that just made a drastic roster change. They just took Gade from your team. They just brought in Caden as an in-game leader. So they made a more drastic change than you did as far as like, a personnel shift. Yet, this team is able to beat you, a team that you were able to beat at DreamHack Summer, the team you're supposed to be better than on paper or what have you. You're supposed to have more experienced players. You're supposed to have the star factor like Config, and it's just not happening for you. And then they won the next 3 games, though. Like, they took care of business in these best of ones against Big, against Vegas Squadron, against Mouse Sports, even beating them in a close game on Nuke, a team that had just won ESL1 New York. So, I mean, I can't really hate on them too hard for their group stage performance. They actually took care of business. Hats off to them. Then they beat the new Renegades lineup. You're not going to gain a whole lot of credit for that, though, because that team just came together. We know some of the issues they were having with the core of the team, even before they made roster changes. So, unfortunately, you're just not going to get a lot of credit for beating Renegades in a best of 3 right now until they can prove themselves with their new lineup to be something better than what they were before. And then you lose to Ints, who are the eventual champions of the tournament. Yes, Ints had been on the come up with their Cologne performance, their performance at DreamHack Montreal, how well they did at the minor, just narrowly missing out on the major. So Ints has definitely been on the rise. Guys like Alu, Sergey, Ariel, definitely very talented, skilled players who are putting up some pretty big numbers lately. Definitely a team that is very explosive, very aggressive, very flashy and fun to watch. But even still, again, we can sit here and keep making excuses like the ones I just made. Like, yeah, it's upcoming team. Yeah, they got talent. Yeah, they have a cool play style. Okay, but you're still OpTic. You still have guys like Config, Yugi, Snappy, who's a more experienced in-game leader than any in-game leadership that's going on in Ints right now are supposed to be. You have this great support player in Cajun B, or he's supposed to be. And it's just like, what's going on here? Why is it that, when you go up against other teams that are kind of on the rise, that you're not able to match them, that you're able to do the same thing and prove that, no, like, we're the better team. We have some of the best Danish talent that's outside of Astralis, a team that's super rich in talent. Eventually you got to beat some of these teams if you're ever going to climb the rankings. And so they've really had some big problems. And we can start with their map pool. That's one big problem that they have. So first off, they don't play cash. That's one of their bans, right? Or their permanent ban for the most part. They did play it offline one time. And they lost it the one time they played it. But generally speaking, they avoid it. So you don't have that map. Dust 2. They are 1-5 on Dust 2 offline. And again, this includes a lineup with Gade and Nico. I'm just going by the core 4 for, the time that they've played together offline in 2018. The only win they had was against Renegades, which I believe was, in this Starlighter tournament they just played, but they've lost it every other time they've played it. The teams like Big, teams like Ints, the old, Brazilian SK lineup before they became made in Brazil and made their roster changes, basically just losing it all the time. It's basically 2 maps you just don't have now out of the 7. Those 2 seem off the board, like they're not performing on either one of those, or they ban it, whatever the case may be. Then you go into Inferno. This is the one map they seem to actually be doing pretty well on. They use it to great effect at this Starlighter tournament. They won it all 3 times they played it. Several of those times they actually won in pretty big fashion. So Inferno, 10-4 record overall. They've beaten it big a couple of times. They've beaten Ints. They've beaten NIP. They've been able to beat North in the past in teams like, Space Soldiers and some of these other tier 2 teams. The only times they've really lost it are to Ghost, which was disappointing at Zotac, obviously, and then Space Soldiers and the Brazilian SK lineup. So overall, though, pretty good, I would say, on Inferno. Okay, let's look at Mirage. Pretty mixed results on this one, right? They've had some wins on it, sure, but most of their wins are against weaker opponents like Virtus Pro, or I think they beat like 3D Max on it or something like that. Gambit, these teams that are really, really struggling. The only real quality wins they have on it are, I guess, Ints and NIP, and then maybe Space Soldiers, but they've lost it to Imperial. They've lost it to Ints before. They've lost it to North. They're just not really consistently able to do much on Mirage. So Mirage seems very hit or miss to me. Like, yeah, they have a positive win rate. Yes, they've shown the ability to play it. I think their play style really suits a map like Mirage with their aggressive mid control, their fast-paced executes on the A-bomb site, like 1-4 type splits, Solo guy middle, Ford is crashing the site with utility, do the same thing on the B-bomb side as well. The type of play calling style they have seems like they're comfortable playing Mirage, but it's not like they have like a super positive win rate on it like they have on an Inferno, for instance. So it's not super strong, but they can play, they're comfortable on it, right? You can kind of say the same thing about Nuke. I mean, they did beat Mouse Sports at this Star Ladder tournament. They've been able to beat some other teams as well on it. They've beaten Mouse Sports in the past before this tournament. They've beaten NIP. They've beaten Complexity a couple of times. The only real losses they have are to pretty good Nuke teams like an Astralis. Yeah, they've lost to Heroic though too, so that's a little bit disappointing. But you know, Nuke, similar to Mirage, is a map that they seem pretty comfortable playing. They can get wins. They have a positive win rate. Seems like it's okay. But then you go to Overpass, definitely a weak map. You know, only won it one time against Ghost, lost it every other time that they've played it. And then you have Train, which they've lost it the last 4 times in a row that they've played the map in the offline environment. And some of these losses are to teams that you think they should have more talent, more experience, and things like that. So let's review the map pool again. So they don't play Cash. Dust 2 seems off the table. Overpass seems off the table. Train seems off the table. And then they're hit or miss on Nuke and Mirage, and they're good on Inferno. That's just not good enough, is it? Like, you're good on Inferno, cool. You can play Mirage and Nuke comfortably, but it's not like you're super powerful on either of those maps. And then, you know, let's just say on Nuke, before they beat Mouse Sports at Star Ladder, they had lost it the last 3 times they had played it before that Mouse Sports match at Star Ladder. So again, like, you basically only have 3 maps that you can play, maybe 4. And even out of those 3 or 4 maps, only 1 is truly that powerful. So yeah, the map pool definitely seems to be a pretty big issue that you have to talk about. Then when you talk about player performance, you know, where the hell has Yugi been the last 4 or so events? Like, this guy was fantastic when he played over on Heroic. He looked like such a rising talent. And when he first joined this OpTic team, you know, some of the first events they were playing at, like the EPL Season 7 finals, like the DreamHack Open events and stuff like that, he was getting his. He was looking good. And you would think that that should continue just based on the trajectory he had been having with Heroic and how he was first looking with OpTic. He's with this old in-game leader, Snappy, someone who, you know, was with him when he was finally getting his first shots at top international Counter-Strike and helping him develop, and it should be a leader that he's comfortable working with, comfortable playing alongside. So why is it that Yugi has all of a sudden dropped off of a cliff the last few LAN events that they've been playing at? You know, what's going on there? You know, is this just a small hiccup in his career? Is he just having a little bit of a slumping phase? Is there issues with motivation? Is there issues with practice and preparation and the amount of hours he's putting in? Is it, you know, the fact that, you know, there's inter-team turmoil now and it's causing a bad environment, that's why he's playing bad? Is it that he just doesn't have it anymore? You know, I can't answer these questions. I don't know what's going on internally, but just I can see that he's definitely struggling, particularly at the Star Ladder event and in some of their bigger matches. He definitely was not living up to the Yugi that I watched come up, thinking that this was the next Opera in line behind the Vice in the Danish scene. I thought he had way more promise than Mertz. When North was looking to pick up an Opera, I thought Yugi probably should have been the first option for them before they went for Mertz off their academy team. And maybe that was a thought. Maybe there was some issue with buyouts or contract negotiations or whatever the case may be. I can never know. But what I do know is I thought that this guy was next in line. And all of a sudden lately he hasn't been doing as well. And that really stinks because he's supposed to be like one of the main pieces of firepower for this OpTic team, and he's not living up to it right now. So what's going on with that? Cajun B, who was solid for so long, he seems to be slipping a little bit. Config, he's been playing pretty decent lately, but he's definitely had his problem areas a couple of times with OpTic. He's definitely had some off events at times, and he still doesn't seem to be that same star level player that I used to see at some events with North or back in his Dignitas days when he was coming up. Like, he just doesn't seem to have that same level of performance that I'm used to seeing out of him. You know, he's supposed to be the second best entry fragger in Denmark after Dupree, in my opinion, with the rifle, and at times could be better than him. So it just feels like he's not the same level of player I'm used to seeing. Like, he's still pretty decent. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's like the burden on his team or the handicap, but when he's supposed to be the star of his team next to Yugi, like, these are supposed to be your biggest pieces of firepower. The fact that they're, you know, both off is obviously hurting the team, because now you're relying on Cajun B more. You're relying on, you know, Nika, who's just joined the team. You know, you're relying on Snappy, who, I mean, in some cases has been a better fragger for in-game leader standards than others, but still not normally a guy you expect to consistently put up big numbers and be a top performer or something like that on a regular in-and-out basis. So the firepower is severely lacking, and I can't figure out why. I don't know if the structure doesn't work anymore. I mean, obviously Config wasn't a guy that had a lot of experience playing with Snappy, so I'm not sure if there's something there. But with the Yugi aspect, that's where I'm really lost, because he should be used to playing with Snappy. They came over together, basically. They had success together in Heroic, at least for Yugi's individual performances and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit at a loss for why some of these players are slipping, why their individual performances are not as strong as they used to be. When you think about strategy, their overall strategical approach doesn't seem that bad. Whenever I watch demos of this team, it's not like I'm lost or that I don't understand what the game plan is. I mean, obviously, I don't know all the fine details and intricacies and counter-stratting and all that good stuff that's going on. I'm not that deep into it. But, when I'm watching it, trying to figure out, what's their general tendencies, what type of style do they like to play, what type of roles do they have for their players, I watch them play, and it's not like I'm lost or I'm scratching my head or, I see some, glaring issue. The only glaring issue I can see is the fact that the same shit that happened with Gade, you're bringing in Nico, who's used to being kind of an entry rifler. I mean, he was basically the 1-2 punch with Snappy on Heroic through most of their time together. That was the entry rifling core, with Val that kind of being this clutch peripheral player, Yugi being the opper, and then you would have one other player who was kind of playing the edge of the map or something like that. And so he's been kind of just thrown into Gade spots, the same shit that Gade was having a problem with. He should have been probably more of an entry rifler, like he's being used on North now and seems to be doing all right so far. So it's like you're kind of throwing Nico into this spot that he's not used to playing, that he didn't perform at in the past. Any level of promise that Nico showed was in a position where he was more of an entry rifler. And you know what? If Nico can learn to play more of a peripheral role, can kind of, embrace the fact that he's not going to be a highlight of this team, then fair enough. Maybe over time he can develop into that. But for right now or in the short term, you're not getting the most out of him probably. He probably would be better suited as more of an entry type player or something like that, but he's not being used in that way. I think the one time I saw them play Cash, he was kind of used in that way, and actually I configured lurking outside the B-bomb side on T side, and I haven't watched many of their online games, so I'm not 100% sure on this, but it feels like a lot of the maps he's just kind of playing the edge of the map, maybe filling spots that Gade used to fill on the T side, and so I do wonder a little bit about that. The other thing you can also say is that when you look at, flashing statistics, for example, OpTic out of the top 20 teams in the world has the worst flash assist stats on the terrorist side of the map. So that means that you're not getting the best out of utility to help support people trying to go into a site and find entries, or maybe just battling for map control, like getting control of Connector and Mirage, for instance. It feels like their utility usage could probably be a little bit better. Now, I'm not saying it's terrible. They know the basic smokes and utility to get into a bomb site. I've actually seen them come up with some pretty more elaborate utility takes. For instance, when they throw a smoke wall on pit and sneak players in from the balcony, that's not necessarily original or unique, but it is a little bit more advanced, a little bit more elaborate. So they're able to pull things like that off. It's not like they don't know how to throw smokes or flashes, but at least on the T side, their flash assists are much lower than any other team in the top 20. I think they actually come dead last in flash assists per round on the Terra side in an offline environment over the last 6 months. And just generally speaking, their average damage per round utility and their flash assist overall is still on the lower end compared to most top 20 teams. They're definitely ahead of some teams that are technically ranked above them on the HLTV rankings, because I think they're currently ranked 16th. There are definitely some teams that are ranked above them overall that they have better nade stats than, but they're still not anywhere in the top 10 or anything like that in any category really for that. So that can maybe factor in strategically, and then you can just look at the more micro level, just making errors, when they played against LDLC in this IM Chicago qualifier, which again is another big hit to them, by the way. They're, you're not getting directly invited to big events, and now you're also, failing in qualifiers, like the IM Chicago qualifiers. They also failed in the ESL1 Cologne qualifiers a while back as well. That must be noted. So when you watch them play these games, a little bit sloppy. Sometimes the spacing seems a little bit off. Sometimes the timing seems a little bit off. Maybe players aren't on the same page as much. So it's just a little bit sloppy. So even if the overall approach is fine, even if the overall spots people are playing are okay, even if you can make sense of what they're trying to accomplish and it's a totally viable approach to the game, if you're not as sharp, if the spacing's a little bit off on players kind of going in and not really taking a favorable duel, because you're not doing a 2-on-1 push on one player where you can have trade potential, but you're kind of just sending one out, he dies, and one comes out a little bit later, giving the CT a little bit more time to reset and get ready to re-engage for a new fight, then you're not getting the most out of the push because you're not overwhelming that player like you would want to with utility or with numbers. So when the spacing is off, or the timing's a bit off, or a little bit of confusion, people not on the same page, and that's obviously going to throw certain executes and even certain retakes and things like that off. Definitely saw that happen in the LDLC series, and definitely seen it happen a couple of other times. Those are things that you can usually just tidy up with better communication, with more practice, more muscle memory gets built as you run that play more and more and more. So I don't know what their practice routine is like, or if that's an issue. I kind of heard rumors that maybe they weren't practicing as much as some other teams or something like that, but I can't know how true that is. I don't want to accuse them of that because I don't know, but certainly they don't look as sharp certain times, and certainly they do seem prone to be losing to low buys and stuff like that, which is always a thorn in team sides when you're losing the forced buys or whatever the case may be. If you can't clean up those easier rounds, so to speak, then you're obviously going to have a hard time. That's obviously going to hold you back. So yeah, I mean, this team is supposed to be clearly a top 10 team to look at the lineup on paper. They certainly are supposed to have the firepower to challenge top teams and perhaps at times make deep runs. They, are from a country where, there is just so much talent. So why is it that this team is ranked 16th in the world right now? Why is it this team has gone out in the group stages or come dead last the last 4 events they've attended? Why can't they even qualify against fucking LDLC for IM Chicago, a team that has been stripped of a lot of what it used to be. I mean, yeah, I know like Omnec's kind of good and they have a couple other pieces that are sometimes all right, but you should clearly be beating that team. And I know it's online CS, but whatever. It's a best of 3 for a big event. You should have focus on this. Yeah, the schedule's busy with online leagues, but I mean, come on now. Like, this team should be accomplishing more than it is, and I can't tell why. I don't know why players aren't performing. I don't know why the map pool isn't shored up. I don't know why their flashes are not as high as some other teams, or why their T-sides don't look as tidy as some of their opponents. I wish I knew. I can't know. But there's definitely a problem here, whether it's personnel, whether it's practice regimen, whether it's focus, whether it's time spent, whether it's dedication. Again, I don't know, but something needs to be solved because this team's running out of time. They've definitely been off track for a while, and I think it's a little bit scary. I mean, obviously you have to start thinking about roster moves. I mean, Kerrigan's sitting out there. Do you want an in-game leader swap? I was a little bit disappointed with Kerrigan's T-sides with FaZe over the last year, but maybe new environment, new players, maybe something can work better. I'm not sure. So, I mean, there's certainly got to think about that. MSL's freaking sitting out there after his benching on North. So there's clearly other in-game leader options besides Snappy, so you have to kind of start wondering if there's a threat there. There's guys like Refresh and stuff over on the Fraxter side that you have to start worrying about. I know Stound is another guy on that team that people talk about, but he's brothers with Dragonfly, so like they're tied together. Probably not going to pick up both, but hell, I mean, maybe you consider it. So there's other riflers out there as well that might make more sense. I actually think Refreza would actually make more sense playing the spots that Nico is playing. And I'm not hating on Nico, but I think Nico is kind of more of an entry type player where Refreza can be more of a passive rifle, which is kind of what they need on the edge of the map. So I do almost wonder if that role thing might come into play. So either way, something's got to change, whether they drastically overhaul how they prepare, whether it's leadership overhaul, whether it's bringing in players that are maybe more suitable for the players that you kind of need because you already know what config is going to be for you. Snappy seems to be a guy that's going to be an entry combo with him. So, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe you bring in Kerrigan, who's like more of a support guy on the edge of the map, and then that means that you have like Nico and config as an entry combo. Maybe that works better. If MSL were to come in, though, he seems to be a guy that likes to be with his entry fragger, so he'd want to be with config like he was on North, and so that means that you still have Nico maybe playing a spot that doesn't suit him very well. So maybe you have to think about a refresher to take that over. Either way, there's problems out there and there needs to be solutions because this team should be much better than it is. When I look at it, it depresses me that they're not better than they are because I know what these players were capable of, should be capable of, and what this team overall should be able to achieve, and they're not coming anywhere near it. Anyway, thanks for checking out this video. If you enjoy the analysis, please follow and subscribe for more content.